Hey guys, and welcome to Film Artsy, your #1 source for all things films, movies, and Marvel. My name's Elijah, and today we are going to be taking a look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe over the years and rank each movie from the past 22 movies, over the years, and go ahead and put them in an order from worst to best. Now mind you, of course, for the most part, the MCU is pretty solid as a whole, so this list is probably more likely a from not as great as to all the way amazing on the other side of the spectrum, because even the worst movies are still pretty good, let's be honest. So we're just organizing a list more so than saying a movie is necessarily bad. But that being said, guys, let's go ahead and jump into this list as kind of a celebration of the MCU over the years and to get hyped about finally Avengers Endgame coming out. All right, let's get into it.
Agent Romanoff, you miss me?
Oh yeah, Charles, we got ourselves an X-Men fan.
Captain.
Your Highness.
Captain, big fan, Spider-Man. Hey everyone.
So starting off this list, or coming in at the bottom of this list, is Thor: The Dark World. Now, there are some fans of this movie, and it's an okay movie by Marvel Cinematic Universe standards, or on its own, it's okay, it's fun to watch, but just as a whole, the plot didn't really flow together as well as maybe some of the other movies that are on this list, and honestly, something has to be down here at the bottom of the list. So we're gonna go ahead and put Thor: The Dark World. However, with the release of Ragnarok afterwards, it definitely had a huge redemption, so we'll talk more about that when we get to Thor Ragnarok. But next up on the list is The Incredible Hulk from 2008, which was the second movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, unfortunately with this movie, it still had its problems with plot and pacing, and had Ed Norton as the Hulk instead of Mark Ruffalo, which, whatever, it's okay. It just, as a whole, with there only being 2 Marvel movies at the time when the Hulk or Incredible Hulk came out, it just doesn't really hold up nearly as well as the original Iron Man does, and that's kind of what that movie was compared to in 2008. However, that end credit scene was a pretty big deal and a pretty big shock to everyone. Next on our list is Avengers: Age of Ultron. Now, the Avengers were, as a whole, pretty fantastic movies, both with Avengers Infinity War, and what we're going to be seeing with Avengers Endgame. They really have nailed what they're doing. However, it just felt like, as a whole in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they kind of hit a hiccup right around Age of Ultron, where it almost felt like they weren't too sure what story to tell, but it was just time to make an Avengers movie. Fortunately, the things that happened in Age of Ultron really set a lot of the Marvel Cinematic Universe in motion to make sure that the following movies really had some strong themes going, but it just kind of was a slow point in the MCU as a whole. Still, the fight scenes are pretty awesome, and there's a lot of good stuff in this movie, but out of all of the Avenger movies, it's maybe a little bit lower than the rest. Next, we're looking at the original Thor. Now, for this movie, we are putting it on this list because, as a whole, it's a pretty good movie. It's pretty enjoyable. There's a great cast of characters, even though most of them are irrelevant nowadays in the MCU. But this Thor movie was pretty good to watch as a whole, and we really did enjoy it. Now, the only reason it's so low on this list is just it doesn't really hold up as much as it did when it first came out, especially with the characters not being relevant anymore, and it just didn't tell as exciting as stories as maybe the Iron Man movies or the Captain America movies. Next up on the list is Doctor Strange. This is another really good movie and a great introduction for a character. The plot can be a little confusing to follow at times, but as a whole, just the introduction and storytelling and the casting choices that they made was really, really great and set up a really cool character to have in Avengers Infinity War. And on its own, it's a pretty good movie as a standalone, and it introduced a lot of elements that are obviously going to play a role not only in the next Avengers movie, but also the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it was a pretty good introduction to those more complex ideas by having a new character who doesn't really know much about this type of world with like the quantum realm and all of that, being able to introduce audiences easily into some of these ideas. And Doctor Strange does a pretty good job at that. Next up, Captain America Winter Soldier, the second movie in the Captain America trilogy, and as a whole, this movie is pretty good. It's a little bit different just because the first Captain America had the World War II era, so it was the first Captain America movie to come into the post-Avengers world, but also with Captain America kind of just featured in the forefront of not being in that World War II era. Still, they did a lot of good jobs and good things here by using interesting characters and having a couple of extra new characters introduced that could play roles in later movies. So the impact from Winter Soldier overall was pretty decent. After that, we have Iron Man 2, which was the follow-up to the first Iron Man movie, and while this movie feels like a lot of the same stuff from the first Iron Man movie, it definitely just was a fun movie to watch overall. It was kind of just like one of those easy to watch movies. There wasn't too much complex plot going on, but it introduced some really good characters like the Black Widow and War Machine, which have been in the MCU ever since. Next on our list, we are taking a look at Ant-Man and the Wasp, which is one of the more recent movies coming out just after Avengers Infinity War, and as a whole, it was a pretty fun movie. It definitely is one of the more comedic movies in the MCU, and just having this plot that kind of set things up to still happen in Avengers Endgame while also exploring once again the quantum realm, a lot of things that we saw similarly in Doctor Strange, but in a lot more light-hearted tone. There's some really great moments in this movie and a lot of really entertaining and funny scenes. Sure, the stakes don't really feel that high at all, but at the end of the day, this movie is just extremely fun to watch. Next up, we are looking at Captain Marvel, which is the most recent film in the MCU, and actually one of the first female main characters to have a headlining title in a movie outside of Ant-Man and the Wasp. But Captain Marvel is actually a pretty great introduction story to this character, and they really did a good job at making sure this character felt kind of more grounded in reality and less of this super overpowered superhero, and it made the story arc and the storytelling with it really interesting, and we're really excited to see where they take Captain Marvel in the future. Next on our list, we are taking a look at Ant-Man, the first Ant-Man movie, and honestly, the prospect of them making a movie on a character called Ant-Man sounded absolutely ridiculous, but they actually pulled it off really well. They were really self-aware in what they did with this movie, making a lot of the scenes funny and comedic, and they kind of took it this alternate route where they're like, we've told these serious stories before, but Ant-Man's kind of a goofy premise to begin with, and we're gonna make that story and that movie reflect that prospect, and it resonated really well with audiences. Next on our list, Iron Man 3, which was the final movie of the Iron Man trilogy, and this is one of the most underrated movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's definitely overlooked a lot, and it gets criticism for maybe things that aren't that big of a deal, but as a whole, it definitely stays true to the first two Iron Mans, and it builds a very interesting story arc for Tony Stark and concludes a lot of the plot lines that started the whole Iron Man trilogy. With that, of course, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has continued to grow Tony Stark's character outside of the Iron Man movies, but Iron Man 3 marked a good ending to the original Tony Stark, but also a good middle point for where he is in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a whole. Following that up, we have Captain America Civil War, which is often a maybe overrated movie. Not saying it's a bad movie, it's definitely really fun, but some of the times it doesn't feel like a Captain America movie. There are definitely a lot of really great things going on in this movie, and they do a really good job at making sure that the story still is focused on Captain America at the last arc of the movie, but it also kind of feels like an Avengers movie at the same time, and a Iron Man movie also at other times. So there was definitely some identity issues with this movie, but don't let these small minor nitpicks take away how awesome this movie was to watch, and the amazing characters it introduced, like Spider-Man and Black Panther, who've gone on to do some really great things on their own. And overall, just if you're looking for a good movie to watch, Captain America Civil War is definitely not a bad option, because you can get a lot of entertainment out of it. Next up on the list, we are taking a look at Spider-Man Homecoming, which was the Marvel Cinematic Universe debut of Spider-Man on his own movie. And honestly, they did a pretty good job here introducing Spider-Man in a new angle that we haven't really seen before, especially because the Spider-Man movies have kind of been done a lot, especially over the last decade and a half. So it was an interesting way to do an origin story without necessarily going through a lot of the tropes that we've seen in other Spider-Man movies. They did a really cool thing with introducing a version of Spider-Man that's much younger and kid-like, and we really appreciated that, and it came across well in the movie. Next up, we're looking at Captain America, the First Avenger, which was the very first Captain America movie, and possibly one of the greatest origin stories of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Definitely up there in the top origin stories, and the movie just was really fun to watch, and just a lot of the storytelling, the introduction of Steve Rogers, and just the things that happen later on in the movie with a great villain and just a really unique story that has a lot of beats and a lot of really great emotion conveyed through the storytelling used, and it's definitely a very solid movie. Next up, we have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and this movie was a lot of fun. It definitely kept a lot of the things that worked from the first movie and told a new story while expanding the world of the Guardians. And it was a really fun movie to watch as a whole. There were a couple of slower moments, maybe in the later act, that stopped this movie from maybe being as high up as the first Guardians of the Galaxy, but at the same time, this movie is a great follow-up and it's really fun to watch. Next up, we have Thor Ragnarok, which finally felt like a Thor movie that was different, but also really a great new perspective on the character and a new way of taking some of these plot themes and translating them in a new way. And Thor Ragnarok was a lot of fun to watch, just like Guardians of the Galaxy and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. The soundtrack was great, the new cast of characters were great, they really trimmed the fat on some of the storylines and story arcs that just weren't working in the first two Thor movies, and they made something that was different while also really concluding a Thor storyline involving his father and his brother, and it was really, really well done here. Next up, we have the first Avengers movie, and this movie will always be special because prior to this movie, we hadn't ever seen a team-up movie that connected several different stories together in the way that Avengers did it. The fact that they already had introduced all of the characters present in other movies, with Thor and Hawkeye being introduced in the first Thor movie, Captain America from obviously his movie Captain America, and then we had Iron Man and Black Widow from their movies, and then they brought in a new Incredible Hulk because the first one wasn't as good, but still, it was really cool to see all these franchises kind of come together for a special team-up movie, and it was just really fun to watch. Next up, we have Black Panther, which was just such a unique take on an introduction superhero story, and just the way that they developed this story with a ton of themes that can obviously be related back to things that are happening today in our society was a really unique take on a movie that's just supposed to be a superhero movie. They did something really unique with Black Panther, and they kept the story very self-contained. While they could have easily relied on different elements of the Marvel Cinematic Universe to kind of be a crutch, they decided to do their own thing, and they got an amazing cast together and told such a great story that's rich in culture, and this movie just really stands out of the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. Next up on our list, we have the first movie that started it all, Iron Man. This movie literally was a pretty unique take just because of the fact that, as a whole, we hadn't really seen Iron Man in a movie before in a way that they did it here, and it definitely was a risky plot because Iron Man didn't really have the same credibility in the same way like DC characters had up until that point, like Batman or Superman. Yet Iron Man was supposed to be the character to kick off this entire franchise as a whole. And with that, Robert Downey Jr., who was an amazing cast choice for this and really embodies who Tony Stark is supposed to be, was also a risky actor at the time, and he kind of had his own redemption story as an actor by picking up this character. And we really just appreciate everything that went into this movie, and the storytelling was really good overall. It kept it simple enough, but it definitely showed a transformation of who Tony Stark was at the beginning of the movie to who he was at the end of the movie. And that's a really nice thing to see in movies that could easily overlook that, since it's just rooted in superhero comic book stories. And that's really an amazing feat that the production did. Next up, we have Avengers Infinity War, which honestly, while Avengers, the first one, was really good to see this team up, Infinity War, which is kind of the part 1 to Endgame, is this culmination of everything that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been for over a decade. And the fact that they had so many interesting characters in this movie, and it still felt like each character had their own specific role. It didn't feel like any main characters were given the back seat in favor of other characters, but it still felt like the important characters had their moments to shine too. And that's something that's a really difficult task when you have such a large ensemble. And then they introduced a brand new villain with Thanos, and he actually has some really good depth to him. His motives make sense. You can argue or agree with them, but at the end of the day, you understand why he's driven to accomplish what he sets out to do, and that is really, really cool. Finally on this list, the last entry, and what I would like to argue, or some of us here would like to argue, is possibly the best movie in the MCU, is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. This movie just worked really well in its own ways just because it took obscure characters that weren't really popular even in the comic book world and brought them to life in a style we've never seen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe before. Mind you, up until the point that the first Guardians movie had come out, a lot of these characters from the MCU were just mostly rooted on Earth and basic. But Guardians of the Galaxy really just explored outer space and this whole nother element that we had never seen before, while also introducing a fantastic soundtrack, funny quips, and comedic lines which weren't a commonplace in the MCU yet. And it just was such a breath of fresh air, and it just makes the MCU as a whole so much more full with these two movies, and specifically the first one existing within that. And we really appreciate what they did here, and that's why this movie takes the #1 spot. Now obviously this list has to be somewhat subjective to the person writing the script, which is me, but if you have your own list, we would love for you to leave it in the comments down below. Which Avenger movie or Marvel movie do you think is the absolutely best? Or make a list, because what we'd like to do is go through our comments and see your guys' personal list of all of the Marvel movies and tally them up and see what the community thinks the best Marvel Cinematic Universe movie truly is. So leave it in the comments section down below. If you're new, be sure to subscribe and turn notifications on, and we'll see you all next time with a brand new video.
If I could hush the emptiness in all of this, I would.
guys, we hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did, make sure you guys hit the like button down below and subscribe for more Film Artsy. If you guys want to showcase your talent to the world, Film Artsy is the best place for you guys to do it. Please submit your videos to filmartsyofficial@gmail.com, or you guys can click the link in the description. We really want to see what kind of talent you guys can provide. So let us know, send us an email, and we'll check out your videos, and we'll see you all in the next video.
Talking?
I'm about to.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, everybody. How you doing?
Hi.
See you guys.
Know anybody?